The world is going to be changing very, very rapidly over this next decade, and I don't think it's going to be particularly pleasant. Europe is on the slippery slope. There's no question about that in my mind.
What does it mean to you if she were to win?
I'd say it's maybe game over.
Do you feel in some way responsible for the rise of Milei?
We're with Doug Casey. We're going to talk about what's happening in Argentina, the best value places to live in the world, what's happening with gold, and who is going to be running the United States for years to come. We're here at Nomad Capitalist Live. It's our big 4-day event. Hope you'll join us next time here in Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Casey, always a pleasure.
Likewise, thank you.
You are here with us in Kuala Lumpur. I've said I think it's one of the best value cities in the world. You get a certain amount of luxuries. You get an affordable price. Weather's nice. Taxes are reasonable. Your point is Buenos Aires is on that level.
Yeah, the natives are friendly here, which is very nice. But I've been to 155 countries. I've lived in actually more than 10 at this point. And I knew that I didn't want to live in the U.S. anymore, even though I was fortunate enough to have been born there at the best time in history. It's like winning the lottery, having been born in the U.S. mid-20th century. But the trend has been down now for decades, and it's accelerating. So where to go? And of all the places that I'd been, frankly, I thought Argentina was number one, although I live as much in Uruguay as I do in Argentina. Actually, probably more. I have a reasonable-sized farm there, and it's very pleasant.
So Buenos Aires, more affordable than Kuala Lumpur? Higher standard?
Well, I have not checked out the prices of real estate here in Kuala Lumpur.
Very cheap.
Very cheap. I don't doubt that. But they're extremely cheap in Buenos Aires. Yeah. I'll give you an example. In BA, I bought an apartment in 2007. It's a big apartment. It's a 2-story penthouse, 5,000 square feet in the Recoleta, the best part of town. I paid $950,000 for it. If I bought its equivalent on the Upper East Side of New York, which would be the equivalent of the Recoleta, it would have cost $20 million. So in other words, it was a 95% discount.
It's about $2,000 a meter is a global standard. Something like that.
Yeah.
That's 470 some meters. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty affordable.
Very affordable.
For the standard.
So that was the good news. And I thought I was getting a bargain. And I was. But today, it's still an illiquid market, getting much better now in Buenos Aires and in Argentina generally. But I could probably only get $1.5 million for it now, which is to say significantly less than the depreciation of the dollar over the last, 15 years.
Did I read correctly there an interview with you decades ago where you said don't own the real estate you live in?
Well, the problem with owning real estate is that the real estate winds up owning you, really. And people forget maintenance costs can be high, taxes are unpredictable, and you're illiquid in the meantime. So...
Is maintenance cost in Buenos Aires high?
No, it's actually quite low.
My bills are pretty low. I mean, that Upper East Side penthouse, I could run my entire places for a lot less than that one penthouse.
Well, in New York, I don't know what the condo fees and that would taxes.
It's got to be crazy.
Crazy, but in BA, I think the total costs, barring extraordinary events like fixing the roof on the building, because it's an old French-style building and the maintenance has to be done. I don't think it costs more than a couple $1,000s per year, which is trivial.
Same for me here.
Yeah.
$4,000, a little smaller, but $4,000.
So you actually have a place here.
I get the 8 security guys all the time. Which very common thing in Asia. But so how many of those countries that you've been to no longer exist?
Well, of course, my favorite country that no longer exists is Rhodesia.
Yeah.
And I went there during the war, and it was a fine adventure, and it was an adventure, but at that time, it really was. Everything from landing at the airport in Salisbury, which is now called Harare, you had to pull down the window shades because they were afraid of rockets being launched at the landing planes and so forth. I mean, it was like that all over Rhodesia. Anyway, when I went to Rhodesia, as I always do when I go to a new country, and it was new to me then, I always call up the real estate agents and the lawyers because they're centers of information, centers of power, money, good people to get to know. There, I also got in touch with a local publisher because my first book, The International Man, had just come out. And I thought this would be a perfect country for a book that tells you how to make the most of your personal freedom and financial opportunity around the world. Because in Rhodesia at that time, there were 250,000 Europeans and about 3 million native Africans. Now, there's about maybe 5,000 Europeans and about 13, 14 million native Africans. So, because people have been making what they call the chicken run. In any event, interviewed a couple of publishers, got along well with one of them, and my book became the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia.
Never to be dethroned now.
A record never to be broken, right. So, but I think that over the next couple of decades, a lot of countries that currently exist will be broken up through secession.
Really?
No question about it. In fact, most of the countries in the world aren't real countries at all. For instance, in South America, where I spend most of the year, I think Brazil will turn into 2 or 3 countries in the future.
And what would cause that? What's the spark?
Demographics and culture. You go to southern Brazil, Sao Paulo, and actually south of Rio, and it's very European.
Yeah.
But you go to the north, it's almost African, and the two places don't mix. I mean, they say that Brazil has the best racial mixing pot in the world, and it's probably true, but still, it doesn't mix that well. What other countries?
So you're saying Florianopolis, for example, a place a lot of foreigners would like to go. They feel that's safer, there's good health care, different than Fortaleza, for example, where they're pushing, hey, that's the cheap part to invest in now.
No question. The beaches are better up around Fortaleza, but the...
Would you invest in that northern part?
It's cheaper, but I think you're better off in...
It's worth paying sometimes.
It is. Sometimes
Sao Paulo doesn't seem that crazy, by the way, the prices. We're talking about that here at the event. I found that the prices there seemed more reasonable than I expected for a city of that magnitude.
Not as cheap as Argentina,
no.
but Argentina is the bargain basement in South America. I think I'm accurate in saying that because things change all the time. But there are a bunch of other countries that could break up. I mean, Chile could break up into 2 countries, with the far south actually turning into an Indian republic because they still have problems. In fact, this is true through a number of countries in Latin America. The native Indians are still resentful of the conquistadores and want to get rid of them. I mean, Bolivia, for instance, should break up into at least 2 or 3 countries, and it probably will. True of Chile, Ecuador, same problems. So,
how often does a secession movement work, though? I mean, in the last 15 years, we've seen one.
Yeah, well, you had in Indonesia, East Timor broke off from the rest of
99?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, Indonesia is an artificially constructed. It's actually the Javanese Empire, where they actually created an artificial language so they could all communicate with each other. But I don't think Indonesia is going to last either as one country. But what happens? But you're quite correct. Whenever a central government is in control, they want to stay in control. They don't want to see secession movements.
They don't give away one scrap of land.
Not a bit. Although maybe the last one this happened with was Sudan, which broke
South
into
Sudan. Yeah.
Exactly. So it should happen in the Congo. That's another one where there's another war going on people don't realize that over the last 20 years, about, nobody knows, 5, 6 million people have been killed in the Congo.
We've talked about Indonesia as this, and it is rising in the rankings of the world's economies. And I always say, oh, look, it just crossed some European country that is totally irrelevant, but got there because, hey, European countries were just in the top 10, top 20. Do you think that in your scenario of a breakup of some of these countries, that's going to impact it? Or is it just the part with the serious wealth just continues to be the player?
Yeah, well, Europe is on the slippery slope. There's no question about that in my mind. For instance, people forget that Italy only became Italy as a country 150,
75.
something like that. Yeah, it was a whole bunch of little dukedoms and principalities. Same thing for Germany, which only became Germany in like 1870 or thereabouts under Bismarck. Spain, the Basque region, Catalonia should break off from it.
They shut that down. I think it's pretty much over at this point, don't you, in Catalonia?
Well, I hope not. From my point of view, or the point of view, I think, of any freedom lover, we'd like to see as many countries in the world as possible, all friendly, easy to travel between.
Then we had a mutual friend who said if only there were 8 billion countries in the world, it'd be perfect.
Well, he may have stolen that quote from me.
I think people steal a lot of them from me because I'm hearing something else about the lawyer. Yeah. Get a phone book and call the lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, the world is going to be changing very, very rapidly over this next decade. And I don't think it's going to be particularly pleasant or convenient, which is another advantage, incidentally, to living here in Southeast Asia, which is a little bit out of the line of fire between East and West. But especially, I think Argentina and Uruguay are very much out of the line of fire.
I think a lot of people in a place like the United States, where we're from originally, say, oh, well, we think China's a threat. And so therefore the entire Southeast and East Asian region must be off limits. What do you say to that?
All these countries are very different from each other. They really are. I mean, talk about racism, which has been made into an artificially big deal in the U.S. People in these Asian countries are racist towards each other, even if a Guaylo, to use the Chinese word for a foreigner, can't tell the difference between them looking at them. They can. And yeah, I'm not a fan of racism, but it's endemic all over the world. In fact, I think the most racist continent is probably Africa. What? How can that be? They're all black people. Well,
because of the tribes?
Because of the tribes, right.
Like what happened in Rwanda?
Perfect example. 500,000 people or so, nobody knows, hacked to death with machetes. But it's gone back to being stable now. So these things they seem to blow up out of nowhere.
So you're okay with Southeast Asia, geopolitically? You think it'll be all right?
If I wasn't living mostly in Argentina and Uruguay, which are very similar to each other, I might have wound up in Thailand, which is in many ways the most mellow country to live in the world. You'll never become a Thai citizen. You'll never become
one of them.
One of them. It just doesn't work that way. But a great place to live.
Even in parts of Eastern Europe, if you're a citizen, you're not really, okay, like we're happy to have you, but where are you really from? More out of curiosity, perhaps, but...
Well, that's a good point. Where are you really from? Because one of the monikers that you popularized, and it's excellent, is go where you're
treated best.
And that's really wise. It really makes sense.
What about the breakup of the United States? We've heard people here at the event talking about that. Is that to be balkanized?
Frankly, a young Chicano in Los Angeles has about zero in common with an old white female retiree in Massachusetts. And at some point, he's going to become very resentful about paying for her Social Security. So, yeah, I think the U.S. could break up because over the last, has it only been 15 or 20 years, the U.S. has divided itself into red people and blue people. And it's amazing that people that have woke blue thoughts memes running through their mind, they can't talk to the red people, which is, the heartland, middle America, traditional values at all. In fact, they've come to hate each other. And this has been crystallized with Donald Trump running for president, and oddly enough, against Kamala. And I'm not sure how she pronounces her name correctly. She had her stepdaughters giving people at the Democratic convention, you might recall, lectures on the correct pronunciation of her name. But actually, neither of them are correct. It should be pronounced Kamala, which means in Spanish, how bad?
How bad?
How bad? So maybe the U.S., since it's increasingly Spanish-speaking, will adopt that particular Spanish cognate pronunciation of her name.
What does it mean to you if she were to win?
I'd say it may be game over for the U.S.
Because they say that every 4 years.
I know they do.
It's the most important election. You've been around a lot longer, but since the 90s, I've been hearing it.
Yeah, and in a way, it's correct, because as the United States has become increasingly politicized, and it has, every election is more important than the one before it. Because one thing that people forget about is that from, let's say, a bit over 100 years ago, just before World War I, which was a major turning point in the U.S., as you know, in 1913, that was the year when the income tax was initialized in the U.S.
Temporarily, right?
Temporarily, of course.
And very small.
Very small, trivial back in those days.
You can handle, was it 1% or 3%? I think it was 1 and 3%.
Starting at a very high number, like $10,000 or $20,000, which
right,
today is like $250,000 or whatever. And the other thing, of course, was the inception of the Federal Reserve, which is one of the major influences towards destroying the country. In any event, back in those days, did it really make much difference who was the president? Well, no, because the government was not an overweening feature. Most people didn't care that the government was there. It supported itself strictly on excise taxes and import duties. But today, it digs into every part of the U.S., takes, who knows, you can't really trust the government's figures, not much more than you can those of Argentina anyway.
That's that common trope is, you're going to trust China, and then China somehow becomes the stand-in for you can't trust any other country except ours. Our statistics are correct.
Right. I know. We're always the good guys. It's like that song from the 60s. Now even the Germans have God on their side. So, of course, the United States has always been the good guy historically. But I'm afraid as the government in Washington has turned into an entity unto itself, fighting foreign wars, pointless foreign wars, dangerous foreign wars everywhere for no good reason, it's become the greatest danger to your personal freedom and your personal finances. It's not the Chinese government I worry about. It's not the Iranian government I worry about. They've never done any wrong to me, but the U.S. government is a clear and present danger.
But if you watch the media, the legacy brand countries, you're going to think, hey, I'm in the U.S., and I agree with Doug Casey, but look at what's happening over there in Europe. They're pretty regulatory also.
Worse. Worse.
Sure, but in those 155 minus a couple of countries, are there plenty of them that it is a lot more hands-off, whether in theory or practice?
No, there's not plenty of them.
There are some.
There's some. There's a few.
Okay.
I mean, Switzerland, if you have a lot of money, is a place to consider living, but the Swiss are very particular about who was granted a residence permit. And there are a few other enclaves in Europe, like Andorra, which most people don't even know is a country, but it's a little bit isolated. But generally speaking, I would forget about Europe, frankly. And if we actually have World War III and it goes nuclear, I hate to say it, but it's possible at this point. Europe's not going to be the best place to be. I don't think there's any place in Africa, which I think is a good place for a young man still to try to make his fortune.
Mauritius?
Yeah,
Island?
kind of like borderline. That's kind of borderline Africa. But you're right. That's where would I go if I wanted to stick my foot in the water in Africa? I think the first country that I would visit would be Namibia. Low population, giant geographic area, more than just a patina of Europeanization. I'd say Namibia.
Botswana?
Botswana, probably the most prosperous country in Africa, probably. Yeah, another possibility. But I like obscure places where if you're a white European or North American, where you're unusual, because I like to go places where I mean, a level playing field is a nice ideal, but when I'm playing the game, I like to be on the high ground. I like an unlevel playing field where I have more money, more expertise, more knowledge, more experience, more connections than the locals do. That means it's a good arbitrage, good for them, because I can bring something valuable to the party, and good for me, because I can bring something to the party. So
You're saying if you're young, would you consider going to some country and living there and building your business from there?
business, I'm not so sure about that. But looking for opportunities to, once again, take advantage of an arbitrage, something that we don't know what it is, but you might find it in that country where that you can export it or bring in imports. But a day-to-day business dealing with the public
Seems tough. Unless you really know your way around.
I agree with you.
Let me go back to the U.S., though, because you said, okay, if Kamala wins, you think it's all over. But
Yeah, she's a doctrinaire, hardcore Marxist by family background. In addition to the fact she's actually of low intelligence. I think she's actually stupid and thoughtless and easily influenced, and she has all of her ideas are really bad ideas. So
here's a devil's advocate point, and we talked about this 3 years ago, where people have said it would be the right wing, perhaps, that makes taxes and life harder specifically for expats, because perhaps under the America First wing, hey, this country's so great. If you want to live in Namibia, how dare you? We're going to make it harder. And didn't Trump do that? Now, you can say, maybe your answer, Peter St. Hans said it yesterday, was, hey, I'll take one for the team. It's the right thing for the country. But it seems a little bit unfair to me, if you don't want to live in your country, that the right wing could do the same thing.
Oh, I agree. They're actually, in some ways, more dangerous than the left wing. Hard as that is to believe.
Do you really think Hillary would have screwed around with expat taxes? Like her or not?
I don't
She would
like.
have been the status quo.
She's a dangerous criminal personality.
Sure.
But most of these people that operate within the Washington Beltway are.
You're getting, I mean, they could argue you never get away entirely from the U.S., but if you're living in Namibia, you got a lot less Hillary Clinton in your life.
Well, that's right.
Or Kamala.
It makes it very hard for them to monitor you personally, to go through your bank records, and out of sight, out of mind. There's something to be said for that. And but you know, if you want to do it, if you want to internationalize, it's the 11th hour. In fact, it's the 11th hour and 50th minute, because one thing that people have to remember is that the government never controls itself, but it does control its subjects, who are called citizens for some reason. And one of the ways they'll do this is going to be with foreign exchange controls, which would make it very hard and inconvenient and costly to move your money out of the country. So if you're a fairly well-to-do American, now is the time to get your money out of the country and establish a second residence, preferably with a second citizenship someplace else.
Does the 11-hour, here's I think what some folks would say. If my guy wins, whomever that may be, now it's no longer 11 hours and 50 minutes. Now we're rolling it back to 11 hours and I have some time. I'm buying myself time.
Okay, that's true. If Trump wins, he's not going to be as bad as Kamala, because at least, I'm not a fan of Trump, incidentally, although I'm sure he's a fun guy to have a beer with, unlike Kamala.
He doesn't drink, remember?
Oh, I guess that's right, and he doesn't smoke either, so yeah, I guess all we could do is talk, and I suspect that if you're with the Donald, he's going to do almost all of the talking. But the good thing about Trump is that he's a cultural traditionalist. Regardless of what stupid ideas he has about economics, and he has plenty of dumb ideas about economics, notwithstanding the fact that he's a businessman, which is good, and Kamala is not. But the thing is, Donald does not want to overturn the basic essence, the basic nature of America. So in that, it's the only way he's a real conservative, but it's in a very important way. And that's why I think, that's why I hope that he wins. And maybe it'll give us a 4-year respite in some ways. But the problem is that D.C., and I lived in D.C. for 20 years.
In Watergate, no?
Not in the Watergate. I mostly lived in Georgetown. I went to, idiotically, I went to Georgetown University and then stayed in Washington for the next 20 years after that. But the problem is that the people that control the government now are all Jacobins. They're the same personality types that ran the French Revolution in 1789. Same way of thinking, same philosophy, same thoughts. And they're pretty entrenched. They've entrenched themselves further with people they've hired and are now protected by civil service. And if Kamala wins, they'll stay in office. In fact, I think she is going to win, both because the average American is easily influenced. I mean, Taylor Swift supports her. And of course, all the Swifties say, she knows more than I do.
It was always that way, though, no?
Always that way, right. But now, in the United States, academia is totally conquered by the cultural Marxists. It was not that way when I went to college, maybe not even when you went to college. And I don't recommend people go to college today, incidentally. I'll just toss that out there.
Should they go overseas, perhaps?
I wouldn't recommend going to college at all. I really wouldn't. I think that, in fact, I'm in process of writing another book as to what exactly should a young person do in that important 4 years when most people go to college and tie an albatross of a lot of debt around their necks. Much more important things to learn and not be corrupted, which is almost certain to happen. Listening behind your desk to all kinds of idiots talking. And almost all college professors at this point are hardcore leftists. The entertainment industry, totally captured by leftists, insinuating wrong ideas. U.S. corporations, international corporations, totally captured. They're all heads of corporations, are all members of the WEF, World Economic Forum. So that it's tough. When the bad guys have control of the apparatus of the state, it's hard to evict them, even if they have to cheat.
You said years ago, you go to Argentina, you're on your farm, you're living, they kind of leave you alone. Do you think that's still true?
Yes, it is true. I think it's true because if you're a foreigner living there, you're not important. You're not a native language speaker. I mean, I can get by okay in Spanish, but...
You get by okay with moderate Spanish.
That's right. I mean, I can still get by with moderate French. I used to speak reasonably good French, but I don't have an opportunity to speak it very often. I can even, like most people, get by in German because the first 500 words of English are all cognates to German. But you're not going to go to political rallies and influence
So
anybody.
why would you
Let's
go,
put it
if
that
all
way.
the places to go, why would you choose the place where you're going to go and be pissed off?
Well, because you don't pay tax. Look, living in Argentina, I don't pay taxes to Argentina because I don't live there more than 6 months per year. So I'm a well-to-do foreigner who contributes to the economy, employs people, spends money. And doesn't make any trouble, quite frankly. I'm not in a position to make any trouble down there. Same thing in Uruguay, actually.
Yeah.
So
Much more tax friendly in Uruguay.
it is more tax friendly.
Yeah.
That's true. And they're both really pleasant places to live. And as far as speaking Spanish is concerned, it's important when you're dealing with the waiters in restaurants and the taxi drivers and this type of thing. But actually, and this is one of the reasons why I haven't perfected my Spanish, is because most of the people that you will associate with as an American expat probably speak English as well as you and I do, because they're well educated, and English is the first language that thoughtful foreigners anywhere learn.
Do you find people feel pretty comfortable with that?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, they love to speak English with another English speaker to keep their
You're right.
skills.
Sometimes we'll meet people who, maybe not Spanish, but more exotic languages. They're happy to work, and then their English gets better over knowing you, and then they're going out and doing new business.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the great pieces of luck that we as Americans have, is that we speak English, which makes it so much easier for us. I mean, if you're a Spanish speaker and want to go elsewhere, well, outside of Latin America and Spain, almost nobody speaks Spanish.
I rarely defend the U.S., but I do think, I mean, if the people in Europe who take a snobbish approach to, oh, you just speak English, you know, if everybody in the world spoke German, I highly doubt they'd be going out and learning 3 languages. In many cases, some would.
Yeah.
Many would not.
I agree. Also, it's probably a good thing for keeping your brain muscles working to learn a second language.
Big
It's
thing to do.
kind of a fun hobby to learn a new word or so every day.
So we've talked about the problems in the U.S. Perhaps it's a different, maybe it's better in Latin America. Why for you was South America the choice?
Well, it's culturally reasonably similar to the U.S., as is Western Europe, for that matter. So from that point of view, they were all reasonable choices.
In what ways would you say it's similar?
You're not going to have, you know, human beings are, I'm sad to say, they're naturally racist. Probably goes back to the way things were hundreds of thousands of years ago, where if you saw somebody who looked different and dressed different from you, they were a danger. Resources were scarce, and you were probably going to fight about those scarce resources. That's not the case in Latin America. I mean, we're all Westerners, same in Europe. I mean, there's some cultural differentiation, but it's not great, number one. The architecture is the same. The letters in the alphabet are the same. The root words of their language and our language are the same. So it's easier.
Is the time zone, that's something we hear from a lot of folks now. The time zone, was that part of it?
Well, where we are right now in KL, we're exactly 12 hours difference.
Very antipodal, yes.
We're at the antipodes from, and you know, and it's funny, we were talking earlier, Andrew, about Thailand. I mean, if I didn't wind up mostly in Argentina and Uruguay, I might have wound up in Thailand, which is the antipodes of the world, not just geographically. I mean, it's right through the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, but also culturally and linguistically and demographically and every other way. Maybe I'm easy to get along with, but those are my 2 favorite countries in the world, I guess, Thailand Argentina.
Best value, best culture. And in Argentina, it's not much closer, perhaps, to the U.S. A little closer,
A little closer.
but the time zone aligns. What do you make of the new president, Milei, and what he's actually going to get done?
He is fantastic. He is unique. I've got to say, unique in world history, because as I think you know, my hobby for the last 30 years has been going to really backward countries, ex-people's republics, military dictatorships, and I've been pretty successful at getting to sit down with the guy on top. And my proposition was, look, I can do three things for you. I can put you on the front cover of every magazine in the world in a favorable light. Boy, that's new and different. Can make you legitimately wealthy. Wow, I don't have to steal all that money. And can make the people love you. And they always say, tell me more. And of course, my plan for these dog shit countries is to totally free marketize them. And I have a plan for how this is done. Okay, let's get to Milei now in Argentina. He's unique in world history in that, like myself, he's an anarcho-capitalist. Philosophically, he does not believe in the government as an entity. He wants to pull the government out by the roots and pour Agent Orange in the ground where it grew. And he's doing that in Argentina. In fact, I won't bore you with the story about how I had a part to play in the fact that he identifies as an anarcho-capitalist, but that's irrelevant at the moment. The fact is that since he was elected by a huge margin in Argentina, 56%, and especially by the young people who were tired of being ripped off by the taxes and the regulations and the inflation, which makes it very hard to get ahead. So he's a very popular president. And if you look at his speech that he gave to the World Economic Forum, he doesn't pull any punches. He's really sincere. He's not talking the talk. He's walking the
Should he
walk.
have even gone there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so, because
Because then now he's the puppet. They say.
that's a really stupid meme. He went there in order to spread the word of what he's doing. I think yesterday, I haven't seen it yet, but on tape or wherever. But he did the same thing at the United Nations, which is certainly one organization that ought to be disbanded. What he's trying to do is tell people of goodwill what he's doing and how it's working. So it's very important. And he talks to the Argentine people all the time. So that, yeah, things are tough because distortions that have been ingrained in that society are being unwound. And it inconveniences some people, breaks a few people's rights. So he tells them that.
Do you feel in some way responsible for the rise of Milei?
Well, actually, the story is this. When I bought a piece of land in the lake region in Argentina, near San Martin de los Andes, which is like a town out of Bavaria, incidentally. So a friend of mine and I bought a really beautiful piece of land with a big lake and 3 little lakes and 2 rivers and right on the main road and blah, blah, blah. 2,300 acres. What did we pay for it back then? We paid, I think we paid $1.7 million or something like that. What's it worth today? Well, we think it's worth about 3 times more. But if I had to find a bidder, I would barely have kept up with inflation. Anyway, the real estate broker that arranged the deal for me, we used to go out to dinner and talk philosophy every night. And he was a conservative, and of course I was still an ANCAP even back then. And I said, look, Jorge, read this book. And I gave him the name of the book. He was interested enough that he got the book. It was called The Market for Liberty. And he read it. And this is so unusual, but it's true. It actually converted his whole way of thinking. He became a philosophical ANCAP. Accidentally, he was a friend of Javier Milei because they were all free market oriented guys. He gave a copy of it to Milei. And since then, Milei too has been, who was always a a right-thinking economist, a real economist, as opposed to a phony baloney
Will you have a
economist.
role in the government? Will they ask you to come and advise the government?
No,
Doug Casey.
I really doubt that. First of all, because Milei speaks English about the way I speak Spanish. So yeah, we could communicate, but
We looked at could he speak at Nomad Capitalist Live, and that would be tough.
tough. Yeah, I mean, what you want is a speaker that speaks fluently,
Right.
colloquially. So we're both at about the same stage in each other's languages. So the answer is no. We have a lot of mutual friends, but I haven't personally met him yet. But
Do you think he'll be successful?
I do, because he has reality on its side. People that are currently employed by the Argentine government are very unhappy to be kicked off the gravy train, where they've been essentially stealing, collecting salaries, and not working because it's unnecessary. What the deal? Yes, he will. He's fired scores of thousands of people so far, and he's going to fire lots and lots more. He's not printing up money anymore. You can use any currency you want, including Bitcoin, in Argentina, so that he's deregulating, so that most Argentines, if they have savings and money, have savings in the US or Switzerland or some other place like that. And we're talking billions and billions of dollars. But now, as cheap as Argentina is, and as free as it's becoming, that'll all pile back into Argentina when they're pretty sure, God forbid he's not assassinated, but they don't assassinate their presidents down there. But the deep state in Argentina is like the deep state in the US. It's dangerous and doesn't want to lose its grip. Answer to the question, yeah, because he's got economic reality on his side. I think it is going to succeed mightily, barring some kind of force majeure. And Argentina, within this coming decade, could become one of the freest places on the planet. And a lot of Europeans are moving to Argentina and Uruguay right now because you don't want to be in Europe now. The taxes are horrible. Regulations are horrible.
It's pretty far down there when the fur is flying in southern South America.
If we have a serious war, it's going to be very bad for the Northern Hemisphere, not so bad for the Southern Hemisphere. And Argentina has always been neutral. That's one of the mistakes that I think Milei is making, is that he wants to join NATO, which is kind of stupid because NATO should have been disbanded 30 years ago when the Soviet Union fell, but it's going to fall apart. And
what do you, since we've met, what do you think about the whole NATO argument? Obviously, with expanding and being closer to Russia, who's on the right side of that?
well, look, the Russians are painted the bad guys everywhere, okay? And historically, during the Soviet days, they were the bad guys. No question about it, they were the bad guys. But things have changed, and Putin isn't a good guy, but you can't be the head of a giant militarized state like that and be a good guy. But when it comes to comparing him to any other world leader today, almost any, I think, he's better educated, he's more thoughtful, he's less inclined to war, notwithstanding this thing in the Ukraine, where he was provoked and prodded into invading the place. It was a mistake for him to do that. But Russia and Putin get a bad rap. And I know a lot of our listeners will say, what? You must be on Putin's payroll. Well, I'm not.
Don't you look at it more the hypocrisy? I mean, wasn't it Equatorial Guinea where China wanted to put a base and the U.S. said, too close?
Right.
Too close.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, the U.S. has what? We don't know. They probably don't even know themselves. About 800 bases around the world outside the U.S. That's an insane number. That's the kind of thing an empire does. It's and of course, I describe the U.S. now as a multicultural domestic empire. It's not the country it was even 50 years ago. We weren't multicultural, and we didn't have a domestic empire, although we were since the days of Teddy Roosevelt or McKinley, approximately, we've been building an international empire, mostly a commercial empire, a financial empire, controlling these countries that way and with quietly through the CIA and the State Department and military.
This country here, Malaysia, the country you've referenced, Thailand, both want to join this expanded BRICS, call it BRICS Plus. What do you make of that whole movement? And they say countries pushing back on sanctions, pushing back on being held back?
Yeah, exactly. They're tired of being under the thumb of Washington, D.C. And
Can you blame them?
I cannot blame them. It's necessary. It's inevitable, especially since the whole world uses the dollar as the international currency, which is insane because the major export of the U.S. since about 1980 hasn't been Boeings or soybeans or whatever. It's been dollars. We've been running this gigantic payments deficits where we pay for Mercedes and Toyotas and whatever and cocaine with dollars that are printed up in Washington, of which there are 10 scores of trillions in the hands of foreigners right now. They're like a time bomb because foreigners don't have to use dollars the way Americans do. And the dollar rests on nothing but confidence. And when confidence blows away like a pile of feathers in a hurricane, those dollars are all going to come back to the U.S. with catastrophic results. So they want to get rid of dollars and not have to use the dollar. Because when you trade between different countries, it all settles through New York and the government knows exactly
They
what
get to
you
tell you what to do.
That's crazy. So, but there's not going to be a BRICS currency either because they don't trust each other. There's no reason why they should. And they just have paper fiat currencies. So what's going to happen? They're going to go back to gold, whether they like it or not. It's happening now. This is, in my opinion, why gold has been going up, up, up.
What's the next year for gold? What's the next decade for gold?
Well, as a speculator, I don't like to buy things after they've already
Run up
gone.
already.
I prefer to try to bottom fish when I can.
Yeah.
But I'd say gold is going higher, and Bitcoin is going higher too, frankly, for similar.
You don't take a gold versus Bitcoin side.
I don't. I think they're both viable assets, and especially as the world becomes more digitized and more computerized, if you would, things like Bitcoin inevitably will have a bigger role. Like all these governments are trying to impose central bank digital currencies on their subjects, which is dangerous, very dangerous, because when they control the money and it's all in a computer, you don't own anything.
Is that what BRICS really is to you then? Is we're tired of having to have our money go through you and you tell us what to do, and when you don't like us, you put us on the naughty list and it's harder, and we're basically under your watchful eye. And we don't want that anymore.
That's correct. That's basically correct.
And why now, though? Because, like, people say, oh, well, the U.S. is always going to be on top. Why are these countries, do you think, doing it more recently?
Well, I'm sorry to say, but the U.S. isn't always going to be on top. They have a disclosed deficit of $35 trillion, which just within our own lifetimes has gone up from hundreds of billions to 35 trillion. I mean, this is unsustainable. And everybody can see that this is happening. They can see that the U.S. government is like a poker player in a casino that's on tilt. It's been losing, he's been bleeding, and he's starting to make irrational, stupid bets trying to get out even. And that's what's happening with the U.S. It's gotten too big and too corrupt, and the management of the country has gotten too stupid. I hate to say it, but the U.S. is on the way out. It happened to the Portuguese before. It happened to the Spaniards before. It happened to the French. It happened to the British. And of course, the Soviets collapsed So that's what happens to governments once they turn into an empire.
Why do you think people say it won't happen to us?
Well, look, I'm all for America. America is a totally unique concept. It's not just a country in North America. America is a concept. It's an idea. It's unique and really good. But unfortunately, America has been being washed away, and it's being replaced by the United States, run out of Washington, D.C. And that's why we're on the slippery slope, where everything is by and for and through the U.S. government. So yeah, of course it's going to go downhill. And I'm afraid that it could actually go into collapse. It could start out with a financial collapse where the markets, stock market, bond market, are pumped up with a lot of funny money from the Federal Reserve. That could collapse. The economy has been built on a foundation of sand, in many ways, over-regulated assets are paper dollars. The economy collapsed. Demographically, the U.S. Is being transformed so that Americans don't really have anything in common with each other anymore.
People who are moving are buying the brand of America rather than, to your point, the brand of the United States. And they don't realize it's gone.
They're living in the past, I'm afraid.
The brand message has worked that well.
Exactly. Well, of course, if I was a young Nigerian, I'd want to get the hell out of there and come to America. For one thing, if you're one of the millions and millions of migrants walking across the Rio Grande, you get free food, free money, free housing. It's absolutely insane. These people are being invited and subsidized to come to the U.S. So, of course, if I was from a third world country, I'd want to get to the U.S. lickety-split. But that's not good for Americans.
That's not who's watching either.
No, it's not, because when migrants came to the U.S. up until, let's say, 1950, they might have been penniless, but they shared the values of the U.S. and they weren't subsidized to come here.
Yeah.
And now these people are being subsidized to come here, which means instead of drawing the best and brightest people, which was the past, you're drawing the poorest and worst people who are looking for a freebie, something for nothing. It's actually insane.
Real quick, should there be some sort of Marshall Plan of sorts for, let's say, Central America? We could talk about El Salvador some other day, where we moved our drug war through there and people want to get out as a result of that? Or is that oversimplifying it?
Well, the drug war is an American problem. It's not a Salvadorian problem. And incidentally, what's happened in El Salvador, which I thought was the least desirable of all Latin American countries in the past, it's changed overnight because of Bukele. Answer to the question, we don't need a Marshall Plan. We can't. We're bankrupt. What do you do? You're bankrupt. Any Latin country or any third world country needs to do is free marketize. Do the things that Milei is doing. Do the things that Bukele is doing in El Salvador. And you will bloom and blossom and prosper quickly. Marshall Plan, bad idea, impossible idea in addition.
So let's end on this. One of the people talk about what you would say, buy when there's blood in the streets, that old phrase.
Yeah.
People like to say, I'm a smart investor. I buy when there's blood in the streets. And then you see, not so long ago, it happened a little ways away from here in Bangladesh. Woman leaves, new guy comes in. Oh, there's a little trickle of blood. Why the hell would you go there now? Isn't there a disconnect? Everyone's a tough guy buying when there's blood in the streets, and then when there's a little drip, they're out. That's terrible. What do you say to that?
It's easy to talk the talk. It's harder to walk the walk.
You've been doing it.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, after I leave here, I changed my plans somewhat, and I'm going to Thailand for a couple of weeks, but then I'm going to Sri Lanka. I prefer to call it Ceylon, for a week. And they've just elected a new communist dictator. Sri Lanka has had just a disastrous history since it became independent. And so I'm going there now that they've got a perfectly horrible human being legitimately elected. And I want to go there, boots on the ground, and see what's going on in Colombo and thereabout. So,
is that a place you would invest? You would ever? I mean, what would be the outcome of that?
well, Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction writer, I had never met him, but we exchanged some letters before he died years ago. And he loved it there. And it would be, once again, for business, I don't have a clue. I don't think so. For speculation, yeah, maybe. But since a radical communist has been installed, it's too early to do anything there. I'm just going to, get up to present
See how it's
speed.
going to go.
Yeah, to get an idea of, what are things like now and what's likely to happen. Things are going to get worse in Sri Lanka, not better in the years to come. But I'll find out. I can tell you.
Well, they had some pretty bad stuff a couple years ago, you think?
Oh, yeah. That long civil war they had against the Tamils in the north and the rulers, like the Bandaranike family. The place is a disaster zone. So, but I'm sure it'll be very nice if you're a wealthy foreigner living on the beach like Arthur C. Clarke was.
You can do that, you think? Can you live under the communist? Feel comfortable?
If you're not a citizen of these places, they treat you as the property of a foreign government and kind of leave you alone. You bring in money, you bring in employment. They generally leave you alone.
The other trope is someone doesn't want to buy a house somewhere else. We talked about the Turkey citizenship program. They talk as if Erdogan is going to come and personally take their little 2-bedroom condo.
That's right. No, they don't care about that. They don't want to clutter their minds up and needlessly ruin their reputation doing this kind of nonsense.
That's the naive thing. Maybe not so much for you, but for guys like me in business, you think, oh, you just ring up a politician with a good idea. Yeah, they're always all about the image, all about the reputation. They don't want your 2-bedroom condo.
They really.
They get bigger fish to fry.
Yes,
if
they do. Yeah, most Americans, unfortunately, most Americans are still thinking like medieval peasants, where they're afraid that if they go overnight over that hill, there might be dragons. And there actually aren't.
There aren't dragons. We'll leave it at that. Doug Casey, always a pleasure. Hope you'll join us next year. Nomad Capitalist Live here in Kuala Lumpur.
Pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Good to see you again.